Assalamualaikum and a very good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I, Muhammad Ammar bin Muhammad Mokhtar, on behalf of the organizer, am honored to welcome you for the International Conference of Education Incoed2021 Education Forum. It is my honor to introduce to you our distinguished panelists to our Education Forum today. Without further ado, let me introduce our panel speakers. Our first panelist is Professor Dr. Jayakaran Mukundan from University Putra, Malaysia. Professor Dr. Jayakaran Mukundan served as professor at UPM until he retired in 2016. He has worked on groundbreaking research on teaching materials, particularly textbooks, and which won him numerous medals in research, some of which were gold medals at the British Invention Show London and at IENA Nuremberg, Germany. Professor Jaya is also a well-known name in international English language conferences. He is the founding chair of 7 major international conferences and 2 major international symposiums, and has organized more than 15 international conferences. His publications include more than 150 journal articles, chapters in books, and anthologies. While he loves research, nothing can take him away from the core business, teaching. In 2013, Professor Jayakaran won the National Award for Academia in the teaching category. Our second panelist will be Dr. Rosina Mary, Director of Teaching, Learning and Research for Tirito Mayoha, Early Childhood New Zealand. So Dr. Rosina is the Director of Teaching, Learning and Research for Tirito Mayoha, Early Childhood New Zealand. She has the overall responsibility for the oversight and management of academic and research strategy for undergraduate, graduate, and postgraduate programs. This role also includes managing the quality, compliance, and national consistency of teaching, learning, and research delivery of Te Reto Mayoha Early Childhood New Zealand's qualifications. Through her doctoral study, Rosina developed a conceptual model which supports initial teacher education providers to understand how student teachers integrate digital technology into their teaching practice. She has a passion for e-learning with a particular focus on student engagement and lecture presence. Dr. Rosina's research interests include the use of technology in the delivery teacher education, language, culture, and identity in online learning spaces, and integrated curriculum. Our third and final speaker is Assistant Professor Dr. Shakina Rajendram from Ontario Institute for Studies in Education, University of Toronto, Canada. Dr. Shakina Rajendram is an assistant professor teaching STREAM at the Ontario Institute for Studies in Education, University of Toronto, Canada. Dr. Shakina's PhD dissertation, which focused on supporting the cognitive, linguistic, and socio-emotional development of primary school students in Malaysia through a trans-languaging pedagogy, was the recipient of a number of scholarships and awards, including the International Research Foundation for English Language Education's Doctoral Dissertation Grant, the Ontario Graduate Scholarship, and the New College Senior Doctoral Fellowship. Recently, Dr. Shakina's dissertation was selected as one of the top 3 finalists for the 2021 American Association for Applied Linguistics Dissertation Award. Dr. Shakina's current teaching and research focus on multilingual pedagogies, technology-based language learning, and language teacher education. I would also like to introduce the moderator for our Education Forum for today, Associate Professor Dr. Malika Vasugi Gomvidaraju, Dean, Faculty of Education and Humanities, UNITA International University, Malaysia. Without further ado, I will give the stage to Associate Professor Dr. Malika to begin our Education Forum. If you please, Dr. Malika.
Thanks a lot, Ammar, and hello and welcome once again, all of you. And yes, as like we said earlier, that we are meeting here today at this time and space, virtual space, from different parts of the world at different times. It is in Malaysia. It is it's about 7 minutes to 11, and Dr. Rosina tells me it's about 4 something in where you are in Wellington, and Dr. Shakina, I think it's somewhere close to 11 p.m. Is it where you are? Now almost everybody is sleeping. Is it? Yeah, okay, right. So it's nice to be here. This this virtual space makes it possible. For us to meet and have this forum, have this conversation, discussion, and to to exchange our thoughts and share whatever we have experienced. So looking back now, it's been about like 2 years since the COVID pandemic. first, when we first heard that term, the new normal, and we're looking back to early 2020. I think that's when it first hit us. And right now, hopefully, after 2 years now, we're actually heading towards a post-pandemic stage. And even education itself now is like beyond the new normal. The new normal is not new anymore, and it's now is something beyond the new normal. But to an extent, I think we are still riding out the storm. We're still riding out the storm, and I think and at many points we still cast a very look over our shoulder to see whether it's pursuing us or not, because it's not over yet, but hopefully we are heading there. So here we are, three of us, four of us, in fact, all of us here, bound together. Why bound together? By the single cause of education, in our own unique settings, in our own unique places where we are, with the students that we teach, with the experiences, with the backgrounds. What binds us here together right now in this place and time, virtual place and the time, despite the time differences, is this cost of education. And that's where we are here now with probably different expectations, different experiences to share what we know has worked best in our own unique settings. So and not only the three of us, I think educators all over the world, we are coming to terms with the massive disruptions that have occurred throughout the past few years. The transitioning, the reimagining of education, all these, we are coming to terms with all this. It's not new anymore. We're coming to terms with this, and also of this embracing of technology in our classrooms, in our education scenes. Whether we were quick to embrace it, slow to embrace it, or whether we were haters or lovers of it, but it's there. It's there. And words like learning management systems, LMS, Zoom platform, Microsoft Teams, synchronous, asynchronous, these are terms that are bandied about, that are like now commonplace in our register, which would have been foreign to us a few years ago, but now they are there for us, part of our life. So technology has definitely has been playing a big role in the past 2 years in our education scene. But we will never forget that although there is technology, in the midst of all this technology, in the midst of all that we use, our students are human. We are teaching human students, and the teachers, the educators who are behind, who are controlling or who are using all this technology, we are also human. So that brings me to the theme of today's of our conference, which is about education beyond the new normal, balancing technology and humanity. So we're going to talk today, hopefully, about how do we balance this, this technology and humanity in our own particular education scenes. So before we go into the points, we discuss the further points. Uh, I would like to invite all of you, each of you, to give your opening remarks on the topic, or any other things that you seem that you want to talk about, that you wish to share with us. So I will begin with Prof. Jayakaran for your opening remarks, please.
Hello. Yeah. Okay. I thought Dr. Rosina would be the one to start first, I think. Yeah, but it's okay. I think, I've never dealt with technology and education using technology on kids because I think that's the saddest part of education when uh, when kids are part of a new deal where technology comes in between uh, good teachers and eager kids. From an adult perspective, because I teach adults and I teach in a university as a teacher trainer, well, I already feel the stress. And it is not about a balance. There will never be a balance because humanity is going to lose out anyway. Because I feel technology is a stopgap measure. And once this pandemic is over, there will be some effort by teachers, parents, uh, the system to come together and maybe figure out how, when the next big event comes about, we would be able to cope better And instead of using technology as an excuse, use it as a proper means of educating not just adults, but kids everywhere. Because it is very sad because primary school kids from my little investigations are being taught online and the teacher is lecturing to them. And I think that is a grave injustice. It's a huge injustice. I mean, the least I would expect is for the English language teacher to sing songs together with the kids online or tell them stories. You know, don't make them miss that little parenting that teachers have been doing all along, because the balance is not there. There is this other thing about what has changed with regards humanity. Because if you looked at the 1916, 1918, maybe the pandemic of that time, or the plagues of the previous times, and the wars, the world wars, parents preferred having their kids not educated, just stay safe at home so that the bomb doesn't hit you or a virus doesn't kill you. But today's parents, a lot of them, are clamoring for ministries of education to reopen schools. That's because they can't handle their kids at home. So there is this whole mess out there. It's not just the technology. Don't blame technology, because a lot of people who are working on technology are trying to convince you that it will work for you because they want to sell it. But on the other hand, the humanitarian costs are far greater, because there's nothing at the moment to take the teacher out of the equation. And the next 5 years would be about trying to figure out how we can handle another big event much better. Okay, I will stop now and allow for other people to do their introductions.
Thanks, Jaya. So, I mean, that is like good. What shall I say? Your opening remarks. We are looking forward to hearing very much more what's behind all your opening remarks as the forum progresses. Yes. So, Dr. Rosina.
Kia ora. There's a whole lot to think about. I agree. When we think about balancing technology and humanity, I think that when we think about what's happened across the world, there's been some big challenges for us to think about what education means, how we educate people in a safe environment. And in my world, I work with teaching teachers who will teach children in early childhood and primary settings. The whole notion around being relational, that how we do that by using technology is really important, because humans learn through interpersonal conversations and contacts, and how do we continue to do that in an online environment? Personally, I think technology can help us a great deal, but it's not about the technology, it's about the teachers. And it's about how we empower people to use technology. There's a lot of research currently around, particularly in New Zealand, around children that might be left behind because of our first big lockdown. But recently, there's been a report published that's got children's voices from the age of 4 up until around 10 years old. And these children talk so positively about what they've learned at home using technology, but also the informal learning that they have had the space to do with their families during that time. Now, it was only a particular period of time, and you wouldn't want people to be in lockdown all of the time. I think for me, one of the biggest messages is, as we have these conversations, is to think about what we have learned, what we can do better next time, but also celebrate what we have done well, because there have been some good instances of education that involves student voice, parents' voice, teachers' voice, And of course, there's been quite a lot that hasn't as well. So I think there are some big challenges, and the reality from my perspective is that the world has changed. There will be more big events happening, and we here in Aotearoa, New Zealand, had kind of become very relaxed about our place in the world, and we haven't had a big event for a long time, shaken us all up to think about not only how we deliver education, but like I say, that humanitarian side of it and how to always keep that at the forefront. So lots of challenges ahead for us, I think.
Thank you, Rosina. So, I mean, from Prof. Jaya and also from Dr. Rosina, so far we've heard about how important it is. I mean, technology is there, but it is the human. It's so important to keep that humanitarian aspect of it in the forefront, and never to allow the technology to take over. We are hearing that. And also, as Prof. Jaya said, that Prof. Jaya feels that that never really can be a balance. And that's what you said, Prof. Jaya, in your opening remarks. You said there never really can be a balance, and he believes that technology is a stopgap measure, something that that will never even that should not be used as an excuse to replace the human part of teaching. So, can we hear from Dr. Shakina, please? You teach in the university, right? So yes, younger students. Yeah.
Well, my opening remarks, I think, to a large extent, will echo what Dr. Rosina and Dr. Jayakaran have already been saying to us. So we know that the pandemic very drastically shifted what education looks like around the world, in New Zealand, in Malaysia, in Canada, and in the rest of the world. And the pandemic also challenged our long held assumptions about what education is, what it should look like, what it should be, both now and in the future. And we know that despite the challenges that the pandemic brought to our lives, personally and professionally, that it did present some opportunities for us. It did present the opportunity for us to reinvent education digitally, to rethink how we've been doing things, and to create new forms of virtual and hybrid learning modes. But I really believe that the new normal in education must not only be about technology. I believe that the new normal requires us to actually keep questioning what we mean by new and what we mean by normal. As Dr. Jayakaran was suggesting, educational technology is such a burgeoning industry now. There are many companies trying to sell us different forms of technology. Technological tools such as apps, websites, programs, devices have been introduced, have been sold to teachers, students, and parents around the globe. And lots of these technological tools are really great, are really helpful. However, if we take these new tools and we do exactly what we've always been doing, and we continue to use more transmission and more teacher-centered pedagogies, then we're not really doing anything new. But rather, we're just disguising the old with something that looks brand new and shiny. So if we use these new technologies without considering how these technologies can actually be relevant to students and how we can use them to meet the challenges that they will face in today's really hyper-connected, digitalized, and globalized world, then what we're doing is merely giving our teaching a digital makeover with no significant transformation actually taking place. So, in my opinion, the effective use of technology should be preparing students to learn brand new literacies and old important literacies as well, not just digital literacies. That's, of course, one literacy, but there are many different kinds of literacies that we need to be preparing our students to learn and develop, such as information literacy, data literacy, media literacy, visual literacy, critical literacy, and even environmental literacy. But not everything needs to be shiny and new. Certain characteristics of teaching and learning may not seem new. They may seem quite normal, but they're actually essential to bring to try and bring balance and humanity into our hyper digital environment. And I'm referring here to some of the characteristics like Dr. Rosina talked about, being relational, having those important interpersonal conversations and contact, listening to students attentively, using facial expressions to communicate our pride and our joy in our students, building relationships with students and families, showing an interest in their lives, differentiating instruction to meet their personalized needs. These are things that technology cannot do for us, things that we need to do. And these characteristics of effective teachers are enduring. They're important to maintain no matter where, who, what, or how we teach. So I look forward to hearing from our guest speakers today on what the new characteristics, skills, and competencies are, and what the existing skills and competencies are that educators as well as students need to navigate education beyond this new normal that we're in.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Shekina. So yes, so yeah, thank you all for your opening remarks, and that sort of in it like whets our appetite for what's coming next, right? So moving on, I mean, some of the terms that were already mentioned was like this move towards hybrid learning. So among one of the changes and developments in post-COVID education scene is definitely the move towards hybrid learning. Hybrid learning, in some places they refer to it as blended learning. So it's like a combination of a face-to-face, the physical classroom instruction together with online activities. So it almost seems like, you know, that's going to be the new way to go. Like you can never completely like put away online learning, but at the same time, it's going to be blended, mixed with the physical face-to-face classroom. It seems to be heading in that direction, and in many institutions, this seems to be the new way to go. So teachers or lecturers, teachers, you know, educators, they instruct their students in person. Sometimes in the same classroom, you have your physical students, and you will also have remote students. At the same time, they do it that way, or it could be at different times. You know, sometimes it's your online activities, and other times you are having you are having the face-to-face actual interactions with your students. So so it's like as if like digital technology or pedagogical digital pedagogy sort of complements the physical learning spaces. And this is the way that many educators are adopting right now, right now, both in and outside the classrooms. So what is happening is like they're trying to draw the best from traditional approaches, and then also to mix it up with innovative practices, insights from remote learning, and then to come together, to be flexible, and to have some kind of agile hybrid learning model. So that seems to be the way it seems to be going in a lot of learning institutions. So with reference to that, as well as to what's happening now in the post-pandemic education world, it brings me to my first question, actually. Yeah, so I'm going to open it up to anybody who wants to answer this. So what do you think are the greatest challenges that for schools at any level or higher education institutions in the post-pandemic educational landscape? It could be with reference to the hybrid learning model or not. But what do you honestly think are the greatest challenges that are faced? Yeah.
From my perspective, one of the greatest challenges is thinking that education is going to be the same as what it was a few years ago. That when we talk about blended or hybrid learning, the notion that I can teach traditionally in the same pedagogical way I would have in a face-to-face classroom and do the same online. And we know that that does not work. There has to be quite a shift in people's thinking around how you teach when you're teaching online versus when I'm in a face-to-face classroom. And I think for many people that is quite a challenge. And we know here in New Zealand, some of our universities who had to shift very quickly into being fully online tended to pick up their face-to-face courses and try and teach them through Zoom and other, through their LMSs. And that was a very not a great outcome for them or for their students. So I think that's a really big challenge for us to think about going forward. And yeah, and it's not losing sight of the value of our traditional face-to-face way of teaching, but remembering that then if you from there got a class who are online, if you are then going to teach in a fully online situation, you can't use that same pedagogical approach. So that's quite a challenge for teachers, I think, for lecturers.
So yeah, you talked about one challenge is about for teachers is to learn is to know that that same approach is not like repackaging that approach and using it in a different platform. It doesn't work that way. I think that's one of the things you're trying to say. Prof. Jaya, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree with Dr. Rosina. I agree totally with her. I think it's not just about uh, university education. It's all levels of education. And I interviewed a few of my former students who have now become teachers, and they tell me this. I interviewed two, actually. Both were females because they were good teachers, obviously. I didn't choose anybody. I chose my best students who became very good teachers in secondary schools. And one was a digital native, and the other was a digital immigrant. And the digital native as well disliked this idea of teaching online. I would have expected the digital native to say, hey, I love technology. It's a part of my life. I do social media and everything else. And I thought she would say, oh, she would be able to, I thought she would say, I'm able to cope better. No, she said she hated the technology that was a barrier between her and her teaching. And I found this interesting.
Experience from your students, real life experience. Interesting to that you pointed out that the one was the digital native is the one who was not too keen on that mode of uh, that platform of teaching and learning. Yeah, I'm wondering whether connectivity is a problem. Shakina, you want to say something? You've got a hand raised. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll just add something quick while we wait for Dr. Jayakaran to come back. I think, in addition to what Dr. Razin and Dr. Jayakaran have been speaking about, I think one of the greatest challenges for us now is trying to create. I mean, it's not a new challenge, it's always been a challenge, but trying to create equitable classrooms.
Yeah.
Because the transition from face to face instruction to virtual or hybrid learning, and then the constant interruption of schooling has created so many inequities for so many groups of students, such as students without access to technological devices or the internet, students living in rural areas, students whose parents have not been able to support their learning at home, students who themselves have had to get part-time jobs to help their families out financially, students whose parents are undocumented migrants or refugees, students whose parents have lost their jobs. The list goes on and on. And so I think in the transition to online learning or hybrid learning, or even if we go back completely to in-person learning, it's important for us to realize that there are many students who are at risk and who have fallen behind academically and socially. And so I think one of the greatest challenges will be for us to create more equitable learning for these students who have been severely disadvantaged by the pandemic. So introducing more and more new technology can actually increase those academic and social gaps that already exist between groups of students in the classroom. So our priority, I feel, needs to be to foreground, to really prioritize equity, inclusion, and social justice in the classroom so that students who have been disadvantaged by the pandemic can have a fair chance at academic and social success.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Dr. Shakin. Actually, that very neatly brings into our next focus of discussion is about inequities in education. So inequity in education actually it's not something new. Even prior to the pandemic, this has existed. Inequities like we may not have experienced that where in our own settings, but in different places, different countries, or even in our own countries, in different regions, there are inequities in terms of food. If something as simple as food deficits, inadequate access to health, mental health, housing, and especially now access to educational technology, internet. So the pandemic didn't create these inequities; it just sort of brought it to light. sort of exposed all these inequities during the pandemic, exposed all these sort of like brought it out from the surface and further exacerbated these inequities. So there's this real issue of learning loss. And we've heard the phrase about, are we going to lose one whole generation? These are real concerns. So these are real concerns. So what do you think are the best ways, or what do you think are the ways that we can best navigate these issues of education inequities that we are seeing happening even more, that the pandemic has exposed, or made it clearer to us or exacerbated to us? So, Prof. Jaya,
Yeah,
would you
I'm
want to
back.
say?
Yeah, you see, the thing is, this technology is, you see, this is such disruptive kind of thing, I mean, you can't even have a decent conversation, let alone talk about what technology has taken away from kids. This now I was getting to the magical point where, when you teach language, there's such a thing as a discourse community. You take away the discourse community of learners, their peers, and learning, and all the artifacts that go into the ritual, like the textbook and the interruptions and the pauses. There is no language at play. This is a crucible, it's a strange crucible. It's not technology showing people in windows on a screen. No, that's not the point. It is not supposed to be the point anyway. So now I know I missed out on that first question because of the interruption. And so I'm not going to waste time talking about that now, because I think it's been very clearly expressed by the two other speakers. But if you look at the inequities, I would be actually looking at so many things which were already there before the pandemic. Like you said, if you don't have enough capital invested in just the delivery, for instance, if you don't have technology that's equal and providing equal opportunities to everybody, then you have half of Malaysia, for instance, not connected properly. And so you find students climbing up trees just to get 5 minutes out of their 40-minute lessons from a tree. And that was exposed very wonderfully by the press here. And, if you don't have solutions to problems like this, technology will be a distant thing. It is an inaccessible thing. So you forget about everything else. So between technology and poverty, there's not much of a difference. The lack of technology, poverty in rural areas, a large number of kids in the family, and parents actually want their kids to go to school rather than try to learn from a shared computer, for instance. What equality is there? Equality is there when everybody is having some things that everybody should have. So it's from now until the next 5 years, I think we have to sort out the injustices or the inequalities that exist and make sure everybody has equal access to a laptop or an iPad of some sort, and then they have good connectivity. And then in case there is going to be um, a another big event, there should be preparation to allow communities to share. Let us say if you have excess computers, then families which have less probably can have a loan scheme within the community to just have those machines. The community has to be built stronger You find that in urban communities, in poorer urban communities in Malaysia, for instance, you have low-cost flats and with house a lot of families, and these are the flats, the apartments, which actually house the largest families. As you can see, the poorer you are, the more kids you have, and so then there should be a strong community built around these low cost apartments for sharing schemes, and for maybe rooms within the apartments where in the event of another event like this, you can actually run classes where teachers are identified within these apartments, and you can run strictly monitored classes within those apartments rather than learn everything online. You have this class in this apartment building for those kids who can actually gather maybe over uh, structured periods across the week to at least meet a teacher in there. So you make sure that this apartment is strongly guarded against outside intrusions of people who carry a virus, and so it's closely guarded, but then you don't have to make it online to make it so exhaustively blown out of proportion and orchestrated with just technology as the main word and the only word. You can actually run things within the community of flat dwellers. You don't call it apartments, because the poorer you are, they don't call you an apartment dweller, you are a flat dweller. And so you to get all these flat dwellers involved in learning, you get a flat dwelling teacher to help coordinate classes as you go along. I mean, why look at technology as the only way out? Why not look at agents within the communities that live there to start, proactive movements within the learning environments? So you're not in a proper school, but that doesn't make that you have uh, a loss of a classroom. No, flat dwellers come from maybe from different schools, but they all can gather if you're well organized. You see, that's where the next big event will have to be organized in such a way that you will have people taking charge of what's going on in the immediate surroundings. What will the possibilities of a next event be? Can we organize kids? And now, so that if anything happens, we have identified the teacher, we have identified the place, so that future flat developers will have special rooms which will have wonderful ventilation and antivirus ventilation and things in place, so that when things go off, the apartments or the flats come alive with learning, and parents can be mobilized. So people will take account of which parent can teach what, that sort of thing. Okay, I paused for a while for other people. Thanks.
Very interesting, concept, but, this is, I mean, it hinges on community support. It's like setting up learning apartment or learning room, isn't it? As a learning flat, and with the support of the whole community there, to be ready. It's almost like a contingency plan in case of things like this happening. You're already ready. It's there. Yeah. Dr. Rosina, would this work in your community? Something like that, or what do you think would parallel that in where you are?
I think there are very many similarities, and we do have to think innovatively. If we're going to say what could happen in the next 5 years, what have we learned from this episode to what we could do differently? We have learned here that many parents have been amazing teachers, and to be able to share that in their own local community. I think one of the things I've often thought about, and we talk a lot about here, is local curriculum. So the same kind of concept as the flat dwellers. We do have families here where it's about space to think and learn. There might be 12 people in that one two-bedroom home. And I remember talking with a student recently, and the only place that they could find to do their online work was to shut themselves in the toilet, shut themselves in the door, and that was their only space in that house where there wasn't a lot of people around. So we know that to learn we need spaces, and we need to be able to have contact with people. It raises the challenges of keeping people safe, because I do believe as we go forward, education sites are going to have to do a lot of work around how they keep people safe. Not only in this current pandemic, but future events. I think it requires a lot of government investment and ongoing commitment, because across the globe we have those similar issues around access, not only to good Wi-Fi, good stable internet, but there is poverty, there is lack of ability to access good devices, all of those things. So I think it is about thinking outside of the box. And I do think that communities, the whole focus on communities gathering and coming up with their own solutions, I think is something that we should be thinking about going forward. But also, from my perspective, not leaving technology behind, because whether we like it or not, technology is going to play a part in our children's education, all of our education going forward. But to keep it humanised by being able to have some face-to-face, being able to have real people as well as people on a screen, I think will be something that we need to strive for more as we go forward.
We can't hear you.
Yeah, you were breaking up, so we couldn't hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, better.
Yeah. All right. Sorry. So just asking Dr. Shakina, how was it like in Canada? I mean, is there equitable access to education, especially now education technology? Do you think that would be a way to close the learning gap if there's equitable access to education technology? And what about the suggestions given by Prof. Jaya and Dr. Rosina? Would that work in where you are?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, in response to your first question, whether there's more equal access to technology here, no, definitely not. Like Canada's a large country as well, with a really huge socioeconomic gaps between people who live in different provinces, people who live in the rural versus urban environments. We have huge population. Where I live in Toronto, we have a huge population of learners of refugee backgrounds, newcomers to the country, immigrants who haven't found jobs yet. Those groups of people make up a large population of our students in our school boards, and so we definitely, the access to technology, access to the internet is definitely a challenge here as well. But I love the suggestions that Dr. Rosina and Dr. Jayakaran have brought up, and I actually, when I first heard your question, I wanted to say something along the same lines. I wanted to say that we need to reconceptualize what we mean by the curriculum, and to understand that students are not just learning the curriculum within the confines of the classroom. So, even though students are not in the physical classroom anymore, they're still experiencing a living curriculum, and often a much richer curriculum beyond the classroom walls. And so we can enrich students' learning of curricular content, even if they don't have access to technology, if they have no computers, no digital devices at all, we can still help them learn curricular content if we're expanding the learning beyond the four walls of the school or beyond the computer screen, and we're bringing our students, or we're drawing on our students' experiential knowledge. So if we think about students, no matter where they live, no matter what their socioeconomic background is, there are so many opportunities for them to be engaging in learning. So like in Toronto, for example, we encourage our students to go out. If you can't come to school, go out and have a walk, walk around your neighborhood if you can, or just look at the plants and trees outside your window and try to find out what the names of those plants and flowers of trees are. Look at the labels, like when you're having breakfast, if you have a cereal box, like look at the labels, like what do you learn about science and healthy eating and nutritional information from looking at labels. Look at signboards around you, and that can help you learn about directions. Look at menus. There's so many literacy artifacts around us as well. So text is around students, and it doesn't matter what language the text is in, students are still, no matter what their socioeconomic status is, they're still immersed in literacy-rich environments, either in their homes or just around them in the neighborhoods. And so students already actually possess a rich repertoire of skills and background knowledge and lived experiences that they bring with them, and that they gather every day from their their day-to-day living. And so I believe that even if we're not able to provide equal access to technology, we can still try to find ways to expand the curriculum to include and to activate all of those background experiences and the knowledge that they have, instead of trying to leave it out of the classroom and creating this artificial divide between school and home. When we do that, when we really rethink what a curriculum is, then we're putting students at the center of their own learning, and we're adopting a vision of students as the expert on their own lived experiences and language practices. So I'm reminded now of when I was teaching for 5 years in Malaysia. This was way before the pandemic. I was teaching in a school in Selangor, and Dr. Rosina, for context, Selangor is our central state, so it's a very much an urban area. But in the school I was teaching in for 5 years, we did not have internet. We did not have Wi-Fi. We had a total of maybe 5 computers to be shared by more than 1,000 students. So I love technology, but I couldn't use technology. I couldn't even do a simple Google search. I had no Wi-Fi, nothing. So I had to try to think creatively about how I could provide access to students to rich curricular content. And so I took students outside the classroom often. We were out in the field whenever we could, whenever it was not too hot of a day. We were, watching the rain and writing poems about what it means to, what it feels like to listen to the rain. We were just doing lots of physical, tactile activities where students were moving and they were, being physically active while just connecting language learning to the environment around them, what they see, what they hear, their 5 senses. So we really need to rethink what it means, what education even means, and just acknowledge and appreciate that even if students don't have access to technology, even if they don't have digital literacy skills, they still have valuable home experiences and lived experiences and knowledge that we can leverage for their learning in order to challenge those inequities that would traditionally put these students at a disadvantage.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Dr. Shakina. Thank you. And that once again, that flows very, a lot of interesting insights there, and thank you for sharing those experiences. All the three of you brought out the different ways and different suggestions on about how inequities is not just about bridging the digital divide. It's about finding different literacies, different ways, taking them out of the classroom, having this community support, having this flat, this room, this apartment, a learning apartment, or learning flat, or learning room where the parents get involved, the community gets involved. I mean, these are all wonderful suggestions, and I think I haven't really heard these suggestions. All these forums and all this, usually they talk about how to bridge this digital divide, how to get better technology, but why haven't we thought out of that? So it does not always have to be about bridging the digital divide, and giving, of course, that is very important as well. The way we are heading, I think that is very important. We cannot not do that, but at the same time, maybe we shouldn't just focus on that. Education is so much more than just, getting digital, getting internet connectivity and bridging that digital divide. Yes. So in many respects, the whole COVID-19 pandemic and what's happening now, it has forced us to rethink education in a sense. So like all of you brought up, education now, it has got to be developmental, personalized, evolving. Student-centered has always been there, right? Then inquiry-based, authentic, purposeful, and even the deliveries of education perhaps will have to involve both the use of technology and not, and all the other diverse ways that you have mentioned, right? So when we think about that, even how we are framing excellence in education, excellence in teaching might have to change. In the past, maybe we're always talking about how close we are to perfection, perfection, and we are framing our teaching excellence in terms of attainment when we compare it to perfection, something like that. Perhaps now at this point of time, maybe teaching excellence needs to be redefined. Maybe it's more about learning how to iterate, maybe learning how to adapt. Perhaps I'm just throwing it there, right? So on that note, the next question is, what do you think are the existing and new skills or competencies that teachers will need to continue being effective educators in a time like this? I'm not just saying about technology or what, but at this present time, it's a post-pandemic, heading towards that now in this, we do not know in 5 years what's going to happen, whether it's going to hit us again. But definitely, we do need new skills, we do need new competencies, and some of the existing competencies will still be there. So what are those that we need and to continue to be effective educators? Yeah. So shall I still go in the circle? We always ask Prof. Jaya first and then Dr. Rosina. So it doesn't have to be like that. Okay, Dr. Shakina, you go first, and then we'll reverse the
Sure.
sequence now. Okay.
Yeah, sure. And I'll make this quick this time. I'll start by talking about an existing skill, and then maybe a new, not so new, but yeah, perhaps new skill. So I think many of the existing skills and competencies that teachers need to have are ones that are actually applicable across different contexts, modes of teaching, and across periods of time. And I want to highlight just one or two existing skills and competencies that I learned were really important when I was a teacher candidate back many years ago, and that I still have to practice. And that's just a simple skill of being flexible and adaptable. So no matter where, who, how, why, when, where we teach, we need to always be able to adapt our instructional plans according to the needs of students, according to the background experiences and knowledges that our students are bringing with them, and also according to those spontaneous and rich learning opportunities that take place moment by moment in the classroom, and what we call the lived curriculum that actually emerges through these unplanned interactions between teachers, students, and the environment. So I think as flexible and adaptable teachers, we should always be questioning, as I said in my opening remarks, we should always be questioning what we mean by normal, what we mean by the new normal. And I don't think we should ever actually settle on a normal. We should constantly be learning new things and finding new ways to do old things. Now, I also want to highlight two new, I think, or newish skills and competencies that teachers should be adding to their teaching toolbox today. And that's the ability to teach multimodally and to develop multiple literacies in students. So an emphasis on just book learning, on just traditional literacy, just reading, writing, listening, and speaking is no longer adequate to prepare students for the kinds of digital and multimodal landscapes they're in. So books, of course, are still important and will always continue to be really important, but it's still essential to teach traditional literacy skills like reading, writing, listening, and speaking. But if we think about how we communicate today, even young learners, like as young as 3 to 4, they're communicating multimodally. So they're communicating through text and images, they're communicating through Instagram stories, through TikTok videos, through hashtags on Twitter, through emojis. And it's not just young learners, like even us right now, we're communicating multimodally. Think about the forum that we're in. There are multiple modes that are required to make our communication effective: video, sound, text in the chat box, and links to external resources that your team might post after the forum. And so we need to leverage and integrate all of these different modes, like the visual, the digital, the audio, the gestural, the spatial, to integrate these modes in our teaching so that students are prepared to use these modes to be effective meaning makers and communicators.
Thanks, Shakina. Okay. Thanks for that. And Dr. Rosina?
Well, I was thinking quite a lot about this question and thinking, I think when I think about technology, and It's important to me to think about technology as a tool. It's one tool in your kitty, one tool in your toolbox. But one of the things I think that our teachers will have to keep ahead of is understanding the affordances of the technology, making it their own for pedagogical purposes. We talked earlier about, we're being sold software and technology left, right and centre, and lots of it's shiny new, but it's really important that our teachers understand why they're going to use technology, what are the pedagogical purposes behind it, and what will be the outcomes for the children or the adults that they're working with in that space. So I think that's about new and keeping ahead of the game, and not just thinking, wow, this is a really good piece of software, I'll put that into my program, without understanding the affordances that it has. Another thing that stands out for me is it's a current skill, but I think we all need to be reminded of, and that's presence. So not necessarily only presence online, but teachers being present in the classroom as well. That's quite a big ask sometimes when you've got a whole group of children, and it's easy to get distracted. But I think it's something that in all spaces we do really need to keep ahead of and remind ourselves and teachers of those two things. And I think that they sit across face-to-face traditional teaching as well as blended or hybrid teaching as skills we need to just keep ahead of.
Thank you. Sina, Prof. Chai, want to comment on that?
Yeah, okay. I think if you're talking about new skills that teachers need, what I believe we should do when we can get together back in schools is to organize teachers and document what happened, what were the pluses and the minuses, how narrate the tragedies that took place from the teaching learning perspective, and this would be actually input for a pandemic playbook for the future. I mean, a pandemic playbook, countries like America had a pandemic playbook, they say, that was already in place even before the pandemic was announced. So, I mean, education has to prepare for this. And one of those things now you have to do, apart from documenting all that happened, is to find ways in which teachers can have better skills in damage control. So they should view this as opportunity to look at what went wrong and and how I would be better prepared in the future, how I can minimize damage in the future. How this is going to be different if there was another event. Okay, like for instance, before the pandemic, there were already signs that teachers were actually moving towards that direction. Because look at flipped classrooms. Flipped classrooms was actually a precursor to to this whole thing. It's like as if we were intuitively aware that there would be an occasion where we wouldn't be present and the teaching had to go on, and flipped classrooms were actually part of this new design to realize that there would be an occasion where this would be useful. And so in the back of teachers' minds, when they prepare materials and have agendas for, let's say, blended learning, because maybe blended learning was actually meant to balance the overall excessive presence of the teacher, and to bring technology into play so that there's a nice balance between the what learners see, which is input from the teacher, and other forms of input. And that should be emphasized now, because in a pandemic, they don't see the teacher at all. and they don't see their kids, their peers at all, and there is a missing everything. They're missing everything. Forget about, you know, the excessive intrusion of technology. They're missing all the other parts. You know, I mean, blended learning was about blending things together so that they have a super multi-juice event, you know, and not just orange juice, but a mixture of tropical juices and things like that blended together. But you know, when you look at the pandemic, it's all about technology. That's it. So now we have to start thinking about, okay, how are we going to solve this problem? And how, for instance, you find that there are so few teachers who have actually managed to get themselves onto materials which they can actually start giving out to students when there are interruptions like this. You see, so that should be important. I mean, looking back at how the curriculum can actually realign itself so that nobody misses too much of the things that we are so used to. Okay, all right, that's it.
Yeah. So, you know, I like that excessive presence of a teacher. I never realized that, and how this blended learning has sort of, by itself, you know, sort of balanced it out, forced the balance out, you know, from the excessive presence of the teacher to where we are heading to right now. Yes. So yes, from what I'm hearing from this forum, from what you're saying is that technology shouldn't just be what do you call it? It's not just a system of delivery, really, but it should rather be a vehicle. Use the technologies. Is the technology, you know, the what do you call it? Pedagogical technology is not just for delivery, but rather it should be a vehicle for collaboration, for discovery, for understanding. So it's how you use it. It's not like the savior of the educational world
No,
right now.
no.
So, and of course, another thing is it's not a digital pedagogy. It shouldn't be. I mean, it's gathered from also what you're saying. It's not like Um, it's not supposed to be, what do you call it? Considered as something that was just hastily discovered in the aftermath of a crisis like what has just happened. Yeah, and it has to be, you know, improved and not meant like what Prof. Jaya said much earlier in the forum today. It's not just a stopgap measure. It's not just a quick solution.
Yeah.
Not just a quick solution for every teacher. So that's the saying in the, you know, this critical digital pedagogical community. This is a quotation from them. You know, this is the pedagogy community says this, that online learning is a human, not a technological endeavor. It is a human endeavor, online learning. And if we lose sight of that central reality, and if we lose sight that online learning is actually a human endeavor, we lose sight of that, then it is at our own peril. Right? Right.
Yeah.
So we do have time for one last question. Okay, we do have time for one last question. I think it's an important question, although parts of it were already, you know, in earlier in your sharing, parts of this were already addressed. But let me throw this question out again. Maybe there are fresh insights. All right. So since the COVID-19 pandemic began, the role of parents has become important in ensuring the continuing education of their children. You know, children were at home, and as in Malaysia, the education the parents had to do some form of homeschooling. They had to supervise the education of their children. In Malaysia, that happened, right? So now in the post-pandemic setting, how can this partnership or involvement of parents be continued effectively? Now, okay, the students are like going back to school, but in the pandemic setting, yeah, parents were involved, and that was a good thing. So how can we continue this partnership or parent involvement? You know, get them continue to be involved instead of just, you know, letting, okay, now our work is over and back to school. The teachers are going to take over. But how do we make that not happen and allow their continued involvement? Any thoughts? Anyone? I'm just throwing it out to anyone.
I think it comes back to the conversations earlier about community. I think for parents to be able to still be involved is thinking about the community, the school, and what opportunities they will have if it's face-to-face in a school or whatever kind of provision. And it's like looking back on some of the conversation we've had today around involving parents, and it may be in the future world, the blended, how we do some blended learning will involve parents, whether it's after their work hours or whatever. I think it's really, really important that the providers of education take into account the multiple languages, the multiple cultures, and the richness that families bring to education. And so how do you continue to involve parents to encapsulate that in the work that the providers, the education providers, provide? We have to think in a more out of the box way, like Professor Jaya was saying earlier, and think differently on how to continue. I think to harvest this is what has been, well, particularly from the research that I've been reading, a really rich contribution to our children's learning that came about through being in lockdowns. Now we know that has to change going forward. So I think that notion of community, about families also saying, this is what's relevant in our community. This is our local community. And also one of the things we haven't talked about a lot this afternoon is children's voices, students' voices. So when we're moving forward to think about how we could teach differently, we need to think about parent voices, student voices, small children's voices. I think there's a lot of rich data there to harvest to make us think about, we thought we were doing it this way and perhaps it was good. What was it like for the people at the other end? And I think conversations with parents, students, small children would contribute to that.
Maybe I'll jump in here. Maybe I'll jump in here. I just have something short, simple to add. I think it's important for us to remember that parents are human beings as well, and they've had their lives turned completely upside down. Their family life, their regular routines have been abruptly disrupted. Many of them have lost their job security, and they're experiencing higher levels of anxiety about their uncertain futures as well. So we need to consider like the mental and social emotional well-being of parents as well. And something simple that a colleague of mine does is to take 5 minutes to call to do a phone call with parents to check up, not to be talking about their students, the children's progress, but to check up on them and say, hey, how are you doing? Is there anything the school can do to support you? Do you have your physical needs met? Are there any resources that I can point you in the direction of? We know that if parents are, if they're healthy mentally and emotionally, then they would be in a better position to be able to support their children. And one more thing I wanted to say as well is that I think many parents might hold a common myth that because of their lack of ability in language or because of their lack of familiarity with technology and online learning, that they are limited in their ability to help their children academically. But it's important for us to honor parents' contributions and help them to realize that there are so many things that they do to prepare their children physically and emotionally for learning every day that at many times is even more important than just helping them linguistically or academically. So ensuring that their children are well rested, are well nourished, are appropriately clothed, showing an interest in their children's schoolwork, even if they don't completely understand what the schoolwork is, just helping their children build an efficient routine at home around homework time and bedtime, and making sure their children remain physically active. Like all of these things are so essential to a child's academic and language success. So I think it'll be important for us as teachers to show parents that you are doing so much for your children, and just to honor their contribution so that they feel empowered and are able to even more actively participate in their children's learning.
Yeah, thanks, Shakina, for that. Honoring appreciation of that. I think I'm not sure whether we have, It's like now we've been in such a hurry, okay, all the time parents were doing it, now back to school. We sort of like have left behind that part of appreciating, honoring the parents for what they have, for holding the fort so long, Yeah, so that's something to think about, Prof. Jaya.
Yeah, I think the most important thing is for administrators to be sensible. Malaysia had a very good educational TV going. We had that. We scrapped it. We scrapped it totally because it was just not hip enough. It was not trendy. Educational TV is a thing of the past, the 80s and the 90s, and we totally shelved it. And at this point in time, when you look at educational TV, I still remember there were so many good math programs which won huge awards internationally. Malaysian educational TV, the math ones won numerous awards, and we scrapped it because this computer thing just caught on like fire, and we invested so much money in computers and in getting everything wired, and it's still lacking, because the one thing that misses out is computers, because if there's poor connectivity, you get nothing. But if you had your TV, educational TV going, there would have been something going, you know? So we missed out on all this because we believed in throwing things out, throwing the baby out with the bath water, not realizing, that we were silly in our actions. What we need to do is to get our senses together, and just like a fire drill day, when we try figure out a mock fire drill, and we have this sirens whirring all around and the fire alarm going. Now we can actually simulate this and say that next week we plan for a closure of school and everybody stays at home, and see what actions will take place now, since we are educated about a pandemic. We are slightly educated about a pandemic. So maybe in 6 months, have an unplanned day off from school. Nobody goes to school, and the announcement would be made the night before that day, and figure out how good we are in coping with it. And when your flat learning thing is organized, and because your parents have been mobilized already, you know the strengths of each parent, and you know who can teach what, we figure out whether that little flat, uh, empty space in that flat, which will be used as a makeshift classroom, will work, and see how your parents are going to contribute towards the learning teaching and things like that. So we have a fire drill kind of environment, and the day before that plan shut down, you have an announcement on TV saying tomorrow is no school day. All learning takes place within your own organized learning environments, and see how it's going to move. I mean, that should be the next stage of planning. That you shut down school just the night before, say that you're not going to school. You're not going to school the next day or the next week. And see how these people mobilize themselves, and see how good they are and how fast they are. And before you know it, you see one flat is working out. Yeah, make this a competition and see who does best. Yeah. And then you compile, you document how the success of this particular flat with all the poorest people in there became a nationwide phenomenon. That they handled it the best, and they get the award for this year. And then you start seeing communities preparing themselves, because the price is $1 million US. Yeah, kill the rest of the country because this poorest flat who just organized themselves so well. They got their parents who were hawkers, street hawkers, contributing to education. You had them preparing this room, nicely, having a learning environment that's conducive and everything else. And because of that, they win $1 million US for contributing to ideas that move the future of education in this kind of settings. I hope, somebody starts thinking along these lines. Then, we are better prepared. Thank you.
Fantastic, yes, pandemic drill. Yeah, I don't think anybody has thought of that before. Pandemic drill. Rosina in New Zealand, Kina in Canada. Try that and see. But I'm just wondering who's going to come up with the 1 million US find sponsors for that. You never know. Might take off, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Why do we have headmasters there for? That's when headmasters should be going around and judging these shelters. In the war years, there were bomb shelters, there were underground bomb shelters, but nobody went around. Winston Churchill never thought of it. He should have got around and found people to go and inspect these shelters and see how people managed themselves so well during those times. Now these bomb shelters, our flat dwellings and our other places where people live, those are like bomb shelters. How do they cope with this kind of thing? That somebody should go and figure out during these drills how we are coping. The next phase would be a phase where we plan for these things, we plan for disruptions, we plan for ideas as to how to handle these disruptions well. I think that would be the way forward. Yeah.
So yes, planning for disruptions. I think that is a very nice final note to our forum. We've ended this forum, and I love the note, the final note, the suggestions that have come up, on how to move forward, from Prof. Jaya, these pandemic drills, these pandemic shelters. Maybe you could even have competitions, which is the best shelter, on this, and how community can come rally together and get involved, how parents. So I think we've had a really, really interesting discussion today. We went through so many topics from the beginning. I'm also losing track, but I know that so much was discussed. One of it was, of course, that technology, yes, is there, the hybrid learning is there, but by itself, it is nothing really. It's always a human being, the presence of the human being that makes it happen. And it's not just about delivery. You're talking about collaboration, you're talking about personalizing, about understanding action and all that. And never to forget that whatever we do online or offline in teaching, it is always human endeavors, not technological endeavors. And you all of you spoke about how important the individual personal connection is in education. um, Personalized, collaboratives, student-centered, motivational kind of learning is important. We talked about equitable access to, that is so important, to food and all the other things, even to technology, but not just to close, not just to, as stopgap measures, but to do much more than that. And whatever online or digital pedagogies come in, it has to be sustainable. It's not just about a temporary thing that to like a band-aid or what. It's got to be sustainable. And probably there needs to be more flexibility as compared to before. When we're talking about student attendance, student achievement, there's got to be flexibility. We cannot be rigid about measuring it in the same way. We cannot use the same. We cannot repackage what you're doing. I think one of you said that we cannot repackage what you're doing in the classrooms, physical classroom, and then take it and put it online. And the other way around also doesn't matter. That now that you're going back to classroom, you cannot unpack what you did in the online classroom and then use it in your physical classroom. It doesn't work that way. So then finally we came to so many wonderful suggestions about community involvement, and things that we can do to get ready, pandemic drills, and how to get ready, what to do. And then this although we and they were a little bit funny, but at the back of all that, there's a lot of seriousness and a lot of great ideas actually come from these things. Sometimes come from these things which we never took seriously in the first place. And we stop to think about it. Yeah, why not? Why not? Maybe it just takes people to take it seriously and to make it grow until it really develops into something. So thank you all so much. I will end the forum here. Thank you, Dr.
Thank you.
Rosina, for being here. Thank you for being here. Thank you, Dr. Shakina, for being here. We
Thanks
will
for
stop
having me.
I will pass it back to Amar, but just please do hang around. We want to have a group photo and maybe we just have a little chat after that before you go to bed. And Shakina and Dr. Rosina, is the day ended for you?
Yes, it's just gone 5 o'clock and I'm going out to dinner shortly. So that will be a lovely way to finish the day after speaking with the three of you.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much. I'm just going to hand it over to Amar. He will wrap it up, and then we will just because a lot of ideas came when you all were speaking. I'm thinking of research. We could do this. We could do that. That narrative. Prof. Jaya, you were talking. We could talk about those what do you call it, personal narratives of those who went through that pandemic playbook. Why not? That could be a research. Nobody actually delves deep into it. They're always doing in numbers. Nobody actually delves into deep personal narratives of what they experienced. So that also could be something that we could look into together. Actually, yeah. All right. So back to you, Amar. Thanks. Over to you, Amar.
Thank you so much, Associate Professor Dr. Malika. On behalf of the organizer, I would like to thank our panel speakers for the insightful thoughts regarding our theme, Education Beyond the New Normal, Balancing Technology and Humanity. I hope all of us present here today will be able to bring home with us a piece of valuable knowledge that can benefit us in the field of education. Thank you to all participants for joining our educational forum for today. We'll continue with our next session for our conference. Thank you so much.